Always got to double check. There's so many things we could say. We try to behave ourselves and only say the things that are really important. How's it going, everyone? Oh, come on. You were just so loud a second ago. Goodness gracious. You guys should know the rhythm by now. I love Sundays like this one. You've probably heard me say that before if you come here on things like Easter and whatnot. I just think that when we do things like this as a church, this is a huge part of what we're called to do, to make connections, to try and build bridges out into our community. I think this is one of those moments in which our church really works. Our vision is that this community would live its life in such a way that people in the world kind of want to know something from us. And I want you to know that that's really intentional on our part. Maybe you're here this morning and church isn't a part of your regular routine. Maybe you would consider yourself a bit of a skeptic when it comes to these things. I want you to know that you're welcomed here and that you're actually in decent company. Because I think and I know some of the other people out here, we're skeptics too. Even though church is a part of what we do, we always sort of live with this little bit of skepticism in our hearts. I don't know if you grew up in church. I did. My mom and dad were pastors, just like I am. And I've been in church since literally half a week after I was born. Because my mom and dad were contractually obligated to yard me out to church immediately following the birth. And my mom didn't get a week off. I was born on a Wednesday and we were at church on Sunday, okay? And so I've been around it my entire life from the inside. And I got to tell you that it was wonderful. And it was weird. Wonderful because I've never, ever felt the level of support, warmth, love, kindness, encouragement, generosity that I have felt from the churches that I've been a part of. The one I grew up in, this one, and all the ones in between. But sometimes it's been a little bit weird. Sometimes kids in church grow up with way too many moms and dads. I don't know if you've ever had this experience before where somebody takes on the opportunity to parent your children on your behalf. They give themselves that permission because you're at the same church. This is what it looked like for me once when I was a teenager. I went to McDonald's with my best friend in the middle of the summertime. And we sat in the corner of the restaurant where nobody else was. You remember when McDonald's, it was really popular for fast food restaurants to have solariums out the front? Remember that? Nobody ever sat out there in the summertime. Why? It was too hot. So we went there to have some privacy and sit by ourselves. It was sectioned off from the rest of the restaurant by a wall that had a row of fake plants on the top. Everybody remember this kind of version of fast food restaurants in the 80s and 90s? Okay? So here we are sitting out in the solarium having a teenage boy conversation, which means that the language was more colorful. I went to public school as a kid. So I learned all the words by grade 2 and was well-versed in their vocabulary in my teens, being a kid who plays sports and all that kind of stuff. I got home from that experience at McDonald's later that day to my mother having that look on her face that let me know that something was dramatically wrong. Because she heard through the grapevine, through somebody I went to church with, the conversation that me and my friend had that we thought was very private, but clearly wasn't private. And so my mother was there ready with the pump soap to wash out my mouth the minute I got home. That was fairly innocuous. I think that person was trying to do something that they felt like my mother would have appreciated. And I'm sure she did on one hand. But that's not the most of it. In my time at church, I've experienced some hypocrisy, some really weird rules that change and are a moving target over the course of my life. Worst of all, our family went through what's known in the church world as a church split, which means that our church had grown. When we got there, our church was just a little church of 20 people, little village church in Nova Scotia. And it grew up to about 100 people. And somewhere around then, the leadership of the church decided that it was time for my dad to move on, but my dad didn't think it was time for him to move on. And so they had a disagreement. And see, the board at that point, we had been there for 10 years or more. And the board was made up of people that my dad would have considered his best friends. And one day they decided to call my dad's boss to try to have him fired. And when it didn't work, they went and they took half the church with them when they started a new church in the town next to them. It was a really formative experience in my life, and I know it was a formative experience in the life of one of the kids I would have considered my best friend. You got to understand, every Sunday night, because we still went to church on Sunday nights, every Sunday night we would go over to our friend's house and we would make pizza and we would hang out and we would share together. These were people that we were intimately connected to. And all of a sudden, our families were ripped apart because the church just couldn't figure out how to get along. I remember it was probably a couple of years after that I finally went, because my friend who was a part of that family was a couple of years older than I was. We went to high school together, and I remember us just having this moment of debrief. And he just came to me and he said, "You got to know that I never wanted that to happen." Both of us carried it around for a really, really long time. So there's a part of me that's always just a little bit prone to skepticism when it comes to this whole thing. And I just wonder if anybody else can relate this morning. I know I'm not the only one who's experienced the challenges of trying to do this church thing together. History is well documented, right? There's no denying that things have been done in the name of religion over the course of time that have just been difficult. Crusades and abuses, infidelity by pastors and mistrust, and a lot of anger. So I want you to know that if you're here and you carry a little bit of that inside you, it's okay. And at least for what it's worth, I'm sorry. And I think there's a whole bunch of people here this morning that would say the same thing. There's a whole bunch of people here this morning dedicated to trying to convince that there's something better, because next to my skepticism, and the thing that overrides it is my optimism. Amidst all that stuff that I mentioned, all the historical reasons why somebody could pick and go, this church thing might not be very good for humanity, I disagree. I disagree. I think when you look at the overarching movement of people trying to follow Jesus, there is so much more good being done for the world than the isolated incidents of hurt. It is undeniable, if you look at history from an objective perspective, that where the people of God go, the society improves. Yes, there are challenges, but there are also improvements. These are places where the rule of law and justice have evolved immensely and been shared with the rest of the world, where, generally speaking, prosperity follows and progress happens. When the church is on, when the people who are inspired by Jesus actually live the life that Jesus calls them to, we're really on. And everybody wins. Which is why I'm excited about days like today. Because it feels like we're doing what we're called to do. I joked with the 50 or so people who showed up early to make sure that everything that happens here this morning and what happens after the service can actually happen. That, you could convince me we should do this every Sunday. And there was a nervous laughter, just like that one. I said, we'll put that aside for a quick second. But I read them this verse as we all stood together getting ready to serve this morning. And it was words that Jesus spoke. And I tried to get them to put themselves in a position where it's try to imagine hearing this from Jesus for the very first time. If you want, you can do the same exercise I had them do. Close your eyes for a quick second and try to put yourself in the place of somebody who's never heard these words before. There's this guy, and he's teaching, and he's moving throughout his community. And he comes and he says, apparently with God's authority, to the people that are listening, you are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. See, God doesn't have a plan B for the improvement of humanity. He's going to do it in and through humanity. That's why the church exists. And that's why, for me, I live at constant tension. I am frequently stopped in my tracks and torn up about our inability, the church, to communicate effectively and work in tandem with the rest of the world. Because I deeply believe that there is so much more we agree on than disagree about. What are the key components of a life following Jesus? There's a verse in Galatians, one of the letters that Paul wrote to a church that was trying to figure out this whole following Jesus thing. He said, look, if God's Spirit lives in you, things like this will happen. Peace, kindness, goodness, joy, hope, meaning, growth, belonging, community. These are the things that end up happening in lives because they're dedicated to Jesus. And who doesn't want more peace in their life? Who doesn't want to give and receive more kindness? Who doesn't want to experience joy? These are not just Christian ideals. They're human ideals. They are things that there's something about the experience of being a human being that draws us all towards common light like moths to a flame. I wonder if you've ever stopped to think about that for a quick second. That there are some things that resonate in the hearts of human beings regardless of their experience with church. And the Bible actually points us in this direction. There's a really, really famous set of verses in a book called 1 Corinthians. We read it most often at weddings. It's a chapter on love. And some of it I will read in a few minutes, but it ends off with this statement about the essential essence of the human journey. If you strip everything away, these three things are going to be left: faith and hope and love. And that's what I want to explore just a little bit with you this morning. And see maybe if I can build a little bit of common ground. And look, if you're a believer here this morning and you're like, this is like Christianity 101, in part, yeah. This is like a Vince Lombardi, this is a football kind of conversation. Let's remember the basics and what's most important. But also, maybe I'm hoping that you'll pick up a thing or two here that might help you when you're having conversations with people who aren't a part of the church. And if you're not regularly a part of the church, and maybe you're that kind of skeptical person that I was talking about, maybe there's some things here that would give you an opportunity to consider the case for God from a different perspective. Because, look, even though there are 8 billion people plus on the planet right now, and if you get right down to it, I believe 8 billion unique philosophies or beliefs about how the world is put together, because no two of us believe exactly the same things about everything, right? Why is it that there's only a few questions that we ask? Have you noticed that babies all come out asking the same question? Why? 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 If you're a parent and you have a young kid, you come to hate that word after a while. Because it's just relentless. And you know what's funny? It's not even the best question in most cases. Like, think about potty training for a quick second. Sweetie, go have a poopy. Why? That's a terrible question. A better question is, how? Or, where? Or, when? There are better questions than why, but here's the thing. Human beings are meaning machines. We are meaning machines from the very, very inception of our life. And if we don't find the answers to why, we will create the answers to why. We give meaning to everything. I mean, just think about it for a quick second, if you can. I am making sounds that are coming out of my mouth that you understand. Isn't that incredible? And that if I was born somewhere else on a different part of the planet, I would make different sounds, and you would hear them differently, but they would mean the same thing. Like, how did human beings ever create language? It's fascinating. We give meaning to colors. We give meaning to shapes. And sometimes I'll talk to somebody and I have no clue what I mean, but they'll say, oh, I know exactly what you mean. Have you ever considered how closely meaning and faith are related? Because all of our questions that try to figure out meaning to the world require faith, right? Like, if you believe that the universe was created through the Big Bang, there's a point at which you follow that all the way back, and you need some faith. Because what came before the nanosecond before the bang? We don't know. You believe in God? It requires faith. You want to believe that there's nothing in the universe? So you want to be an atheist? That requires faith too. Nothing is known fully, and yet we are driven as a species to want to know. And I know that the idea of objective truth is unpopular in our society. But I think that our question of why our looking for meaning is actually looking for truth. What is true? What can be trusted? Because that's what truth is about. Truth and your perception of truth is really about trust. Right? And that's the essential question that Jesus asks us to answer. Will you trust me? John chapter 14, verse 1 says this, don't let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God and also trust in me. But meaning and faith and trust is not the only thing that we all share in common. It's not the only thing that leads us to a common experience. Hope is also absolutely necessary to our life. And hope is all about your future. Hope is all about progress. Hope is all about a need to see tomorrow as better than today. It's all about the human need to make progress. The funny thing about hope is that the target's always changing, and the minute you achieve what you were hoping for, you need to hope for something else. Do you ever notice that? I hope I can date that girl. I hope she'll come meet my parents. I hope he'll get a ring and propose to me. I hope our wedding is nice. I hope he's not a jerk when we get married. I hope. The target is always moving. I hope I'll get that new job. And then I hope I'll get a raise. And then I hope I'll get the promotion so that I can get another raise. And then I hope I'll get that new job that's better than the job I have now. We need to progress, to see some version of whatever we've adopted as success, to grow as human beings. These are all language that we've given to our need for hope. And we have a language for the absence of hope as well. When we get absolutely hopeless, we call that depression. Depression is our soul's way of telling us we've stopped making progress, stopped moving forward. On things we experience on our way towards apathy, despair, emptiness, living an average life, they are all ways to describe our lack of progress. And I don't want to make light of anybody's mental health journey. So please don't hear me doing that this morning. Your mental health journey is important. And we don't come from the perspective here that every single answer you need for your mental health journey can be found in the pages of the Bible. There are professional people who have studied and have been given wisdom, I believe, by God, because all good things and all wisdom come from God, to help you on your journey. But friends, when you hear one of those words, or when you begin to describe yourself in those terms, I would encourage you, make them a trigger in your life and in the life of the people around you. Because when we start to use those words to describe our experience, I believe it's your soul calling out for health, calling you to continue to make progress. And I think both of these things, our need for meaning, our need for hope, they're like fingerprints of God's work in the human soul. Residual proof that we all come from a common design. Because it is inherent in human beings uniquely to have the ability to think about hope. We are the only species that can see a future that doesn't exist and then go about creating it. It is a beautiful gift left imprinted on you by the God who made you, in whose image you have been made. Because He is a creative God. The Bible starts out telling us this about God. It's the first thing you learn about God. In the beginning, God created. And if we are made in His image, then maybe it shouldn't be as much a surprise that one of the things that we desperately need to do is create, is progress. It's why we have dreams. It's why we have hopes. It's why we have ambitions. We were made to hope. Just like we were made for love. This one probably is the easiest one to convince everybody of. What is a human life devoid of love? What happens when we're not well connected to our parents? What happens when love is not a part of our story? We're designed for connection and for belonging. And even when we get to a place where it feels like we don't really want each other. You remember how in the early days of COVID, it was kind of a relief not to see anybody? Even the extroverts were like, this is kind of nice. I don't need to go anywhere on anyone else's schedule. I don't know how long that feeling lasted for you. If you're an introvert, it probably lasted a lot longer than it did for me. And that's okay. But you know, one of the things that we've realized coming out of COVID is that we actually do need each other. And that when we're devoid of each other for too long, when we miss human connection for too long, our lives spin out of control. right? Is this not one of the things, one of the most desperate lessons we should take out of 2 years plus of being isolated from each other? We are still, I don't even want to guess how long we will continue to experience the echo of the problem of being disconnected from each other for 2 years. Our mental health has never been lower. We were not made for life in isolation. Life was not made to be done alone. And I get it. It's been difficult even for us to come back and to find those personal human connections. It may be the hardest thing on earth to create a functional human community because it's never perfect. The minute I join it, it's screwed up. And you can laugh at me if you want, but the same is true of you. The minute any of us join the community, it's not perfect anymore. It's the great paradox of human life. We all deeply, desperately want to know unconditional love, and none of us can give it. Maybe that's why we continue to read those words from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It's not self-seeking. It isn't easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices in the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Does that describe anybody's version of love perfectly? No. We read it as an aspiration, but we read it knowing that for each other, it's never going to work. So why do we keep reading it? Because we're all longing for it. The maddening pursuit of genuine, unconditional love. It's another one of those fingerprints. Residual proof that God exists, that we all come from the same source. So you see, whether you grew up in church or not, we're not so different. We all long for and need the same things. If we don't find trust, we live in fear. We don't find hope, we live in despair. And if we don't find love, we drift through life utterly disconnected. And if you listen, every day, every single day, the soul you are given by the God who created you will tell you that you need meaning and progress and love. Which is why, 2,000 years ago, God sent Jesus Christ into the world so that we would know what it looks like to live a life of faith and hope and love. God himself came, wrapped himself in human flesh so that we would know a better way. And gosh, do we need a better way? Do we need better models? I feel like as we slip further and further from a society who leans into faith, we continue to lower the bar more and more and more. And I'm not a political person. I don't want to make this a political place. But I'll pick on everyone equally. I just say, does any of these people that we keep trying to give power to feel like they're the right person to give power to? We can do better. We need faith, not fear. Hope, not despair. Love, not hate. And when we pursue these things over the course of a lifetime, we grow. We change. The people around us change. And the world is healed one person at a time, one family at a time, one community at a time. It can happen. It does happen. I talked to my mom and dad on the phone earlier this week. Maybe it was last. Doesn't matter. I remember I told you about that church split at the beginning. My mom and dad left Nova Scotia shortly after I did, moved to Ontario, spent a couple of decades in Ontario, but when it came time to retire, they moved back to where I grew up. And I've oddly had the opportunity to live in 5 of the 10 Canadian provinces now, so I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on like what culture does as you move across the country. And the Maritimes, for all of their beauty and good vibes, it's a pretty conservative place. So mom and dad, having lived in Ontario for a number of years, found it really difficult to find a church home when they moved back to Nova Scotia, even though they led one when I was a kid. They felt like none of the churches had changed. Like all the churches were frozen in 1998. And my mom and dad, who have been avid members of churches my entire life, went 18 months without being able to find a church where they felt they belonged. And they tried every church, and they went to churches where they had friends, and they just couldn't find a place to go. Until one day they were walking around in their small town, and they ran into one of those people that broke our hearts and started a new church in the town that mom and dad live in now. And I don't know if it's like beautiful or wild, but they actually invited my mom and dad to their church. Yeah. Except maybe you can understand why they were conflicted when they got invited. And I think my dad went first because he had kind of maybe moved on more quickly. My mom really didn't want to go. And then she asked some friends who had stayed at our old church if they would come with her while she tried it out, and they were like, heck no. Isn't it funny how that place that was such a source of heartache became exactly the community that they needed decades later? Because in spite of making a wildly wrong choice 20 years ago, my mom and dad and all those people who made that wildly wrong choice kept trying to follow Jesus and do the best they could. And it turns out that over the long course of a life, God really can heal people. The gospel community really does change us. To the point that this last week, the really relevant thing, they've been going to that church for about a year, and the pastor walked into Home Depot because my dad is now the old Home Depot guy. Just awesome. Like, never invite me to fix anything in your house. A few of you have come and helped me fix my house. You know this is true. I'm a good supervisor. I'm a terrible hammerer. I'm about that good at hammering as I am at the English language. And the pastor walks into Home Depot, and he finds my dad. He says, "Oh, hey, Bill, would you consider leading a Bible study at our church sometime?" Like, he kind of knows my dad's been outed now as an old pastor. And my dad said, yeah, tell me more about it. He said, well, actually, I have this couple at our church who says they'll host a Bible study at their house, but only if you lead the Bible study at their house. No pressure. It's a good volunteer recruitment tactic. I might employ it at some point. And my dad said, oh, whose house is it? It's the president of the board who tried to get my dad fired 20 years ago. Like, I can't make it up. I really can't. The only conclusion I have is that God really is at work. And that the gospel community really can change hearts by the power of the Holy Spirit in the name of Jesus Christ. Right? So, our mission is to invite everyone to participate in the story that God is telling, that through the power of the Holy Spirit working in a human life, we can find somebody to trust. We can make progress. And our souls can know the unconditional love they long for. Which is why days like today matter. And why, if I could, I'd have you all come and do this every single week. But you don't need cotton candy in order to invite somebody to experience the beauty of what the church is. And I hope this morning deeply that if you're new here and you don't normally come and you're a little bit skeptical about this whole thing, that maybe, just maybe, you'll experience some pretty broken people who are finding health and healing by allowing those things that our souls long for to be provided by God and the community and connection of his people. That's what I hope for today. You are welcomed here, just as you are, to belong before you believe, to grow, and to learn to live and love serving other people. Because I believe if we do those things together, the world continues to progress. The future gets better. And our lives do too. So let me pray with you. Jesus, thank you for coming to us when we were unable and incapable of finding our way to put the light of life in our hearts. That as we give ourselves to you and as we learn to follow you and as we learn to trust you above every other form of leadership that the world might offer us, that we can be the light the world needs. Because that's what overcomes darkness. The only thing that overcomes the darkness in this world is light. And you have given us the opportunity, the privilege of joining you to be a light in dark places. Even if those dark places are just the loneliness we experience in our everyday lives, but also to provide opportunity and healing and resources to people who desperately need it. Thank you for calling us. Thank you for coming to us. And look, if you're here and this is new and you're hearing it and there's something going on in your heart that you just can't quite put a finger on, it's probably God speaking to you. It's probably Jesus calling you to let him provide the trust and growth and love that you long for. And it's really simple. If you want to begin a journey with him, There's no magic in it. You just tell him, Jesus, I give you my life. Really simple phrase. Jesus, I give you my life. And in that moment, he will begin a journey with you that will change you forever. And if that's anyone here, we would just love to help you know what the next step is. Don't go home and keep it to yourself. Grab myself or Pastor Melissa. Anybody who looks like they know what they're doing. Because I guarantee most people here will want to hear that good news and be a help if they can. So Jesus, we just give ourselves to you again. We love you. We thank you for the firm foundation you've created for our lives. And pray that we would have the wisdom to stand on it and build the life that you had in mind for us when you knitted us together in our mother's womb. We thank you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to invite you to stand one more time. The band's going to lead us in a final song. Pastor Melissa will have a couple of instructions for us after that, but join us as we sing and celebrate this morning.